All right, we left off basically just getting this app ready to roll. We still need to actually make the model of discussions, so that's what we're going to start with in this video. Let's go ahead and go to our command line, and I'm going to just kill this. Well, I'll probably just make a new tab and keep that server running. I do have guard installed and live reload, so that's something you can use optionally. It's just kind of great for browser refreshing and stuff. It does it automatically on the fly. So I'm gonna cd into our discussion app and just run bundle exec guard. And I feel like I forgot something actually. I need to do a guard init live reload. I need to Google that. I can't spell, guys. What the hell? Reload. You need to create a guard file or whatever it is here. Guard init live reload. For whatever reason, I can never remember that. And literally just run that. It'll create a file that kind of just builds into what you already have into Rails, and you should be all set. So at this point, you can just run bundle exec guard. And you're not currently in the bundle. Perhaps you meant to add it to your gem file. You know what I think I forgot is guard. Let me update our gems. I didn't add it. Okay, that's interesting. I thought I did. So we can go ahead and grab that real quick. And this will be on the development and test. It could be on just development too. Up to you how you want to run that. We still need to grab guard itself too, so I'm going to do that as well. I like to go to Ruby gems to get the latest version. So, and just type guard. Should be the one with the mega amount of downloads. And we'll pass that in there. And then we could run bundle. Sorry for sidetracking here. Okay, great. So then we could just run bundle exec guard maybe. Boom. Okay, cool. So now you just need to have live reload downloaded on your browser, which I have this little icon here. You can, depending on your browser, you can download that from pretty much anywhere and get it on your browser. And it just listens for changes to the files and refreshes automatically. All right, so let's finally scaffold our discussions controller. I'm going to duplicate this tab. So we're in our discussions directory. And I'm going to do Rails generate discussion or scaffold. We'll call it discussion. And we're going to pass in a title that is a string and content that is text. This can create quite a few files. So we'll go through those. Basically generated all of our views, our controller, our model, a migration, and some JBuilder stuff for Ajax tests and assets, all the fancy stuff there. So we've got our project open. I can go ahead and do a few cleanup tasks. Every time you run a scaffold, it generates a scaffold CSS file that conflicts with what we're doing. So I'm going to just delete it for now. It also creates a independent discussion style sheet. You can use this if you want to separate concerns. I'm not doing tons of styles in this app, so it's not a big deal to even have it, but up to you how you want to do that. Right now I will just go ahead and add base classes that I'll use throughout that are kind of just utility. Also imported a style sheet called functions. We don't have it yet, but I'll create it here. This one I will copy and paste. I'm going to create a new partial, and you do that by doing an underscore and then giving it a title. And basically this won't render on its own. If you compile it, Rails will know to basically look for it and include it in the next import, assuming you import it. So I'm going to reference my other app, my demo app, to just grab this stuff. It's more or less just utility classes. I use this in the daytime, basically, on my job, where we just write CSS. It's a little more scalable. So we just keep functional CSS or atomic CSS, whatever you want to call it. I just did a video about this. Definitely check that out if you haven't. It's worth noting, just for the sake of scaling CSS, which is probably the hardest thing to do in the world. But yeah. Okay, so our styles are set up. We went ahead and created our discussions page, and we should be able to at least render what we're doing here. I need to, since we generated that huge discussion scaffold, we needed to run our migrations. And that adds that to our schema next. Cool. So we've got that done. If we look in our database and our schema now, we have title and content and created at, updated at. Awesome. So now we have discussions. We can route to something new in that case. So by default on this app, I want to route to discussions index. So I'll go to my config file, routes, and I'm going to change this to discussions index. You'll notice it created resources for discussions above. That's perfect. So we'll be revisiting this file in a little bit, but for now I think we can get rolling. Redirect to a new discussion. You can create a new one. It looks terrible, but you can do so. And it's got a title and content. Great. So let's go ahead and update our views. So this is starting to more or less take shape. I guess we could probably generate our other models as well. So I think I'll do that just so there's no conflicts. So let me do that next. And before I forget, I'll just add. Oh, we did a lot. I'll just call it that, even though it's not really exact. But this is only me working on this, so it's not a big deal. Okay, so next we actually need to add, to be able to have a user create a new discussion and have them be the author of it, they need to have their association intact. So doing so means I need to have a user ID field on the discussions table. So let's go ahead and generate a migration. You'll notice when we do these relationships, all the IDs kind of pertain to each other model, and that's important because that's how they more or less connect and communicate. Let's go and say add user ID to discussions. And this will be an integer. So we already have users installed because we have devise, and we're going to be grabbing the user who is logged in and adding it to a discussion, because you can't create a discussion unless you're logged in, if that makes sense. And I already know that's fine, so I'm going to just do Rails db migrate. Boom. All right. So we should see that now on our database. I just like to look just to give some closure. We've got a user ID and it's an integer. Sweet. All right, cool. Next we can create our replies, and within a discussion I want to be able to have comments, and that basically means creating those as a new model. So we can do Rails generate. I'm probably just gonna do, I called it reply, and it's gonna have a field called reply, which isn't a good name. Change it if you can. I just didn't do that in this case, so oh well. And I'll do that, and that's pretty much it. So we'll just run that. It's gonna generate a model because it generated the model with a migration. Okay, And just to verify, I want to double check that did what we wanted. Cool. And I don't think we have views yet for the reply, but it's going to be kind of a sticky situation in terms of it because I want to nest replies within comment or discussions. So to do that, first let's set up the routes. And we have resources discussions here, but I want within a discussion, I want to be able to see our replies. So we can just do a block by saying do a Ruby block. And then within there, we can define another resources of replies. So that would look, to give you perspective, with that done, we can maybe reboot our server and go back over here and just do rake routes. And this gives you, it spits out all of your routes. It's just kind of a helpful tool to see what's up. So you'll notice because we've done this, it's just kind of going to work in our favor to make the right path. So we've got discussions, discussion ID, and the replies and all that stuff. So it's kind of working out for us. So that's pretty easy to set up, but getting everything to work is a little harder. So with that done, we can just go ahead and say replies is sort of working. It's not going to work out of the box because we have to kind of make it look pretty and all that jazz, but and add it to our views as well as do quite a bit of controller work, but that's soon to come. So next, finally, I want to generate our channels controller, and that's going to look like Rails generate scaffold channel. And for channels, we're just going to create a channel, and it's going to be a string. This is going to create basically all the RESTful routes that we want. It's kind of overkill, but I'm just doing it for demonstration. So if your own app, you might clean some of those files up or just not completely create an entire mess like that. Okay, cool. So with that done, we can go ahead and it did again the scaffold thing, so I'm going to delete that one. All right, so to associate these three, we've got channels, we've got discussions, and users, and I want them all to associate in a special way. To do that, we need a bit of groundwork in creating some migrations. Let's see, our discussion is going to have a channel ID and a user ID. Our channel is going to have a discussion ID, and our users are going to have nothing. So we'll go through this pretty closely and try to figure it out. So we're going to have, we've already added our user ID to discussions. We've created our replies. We're going to add our discussion ID to replies next. So we're going to go Rails, generate migration, add discussion ID to replies. And discussion ID will be what it's called. It's going to be integer. Run that. And we want to add the user ID too. So Rails, generate migration, add user ID to replies. User ID, integer. And we could just do Rails db migrate. Make sure that works. So I forgot to run migration before, so we created the channels just now, and we're running the migration to add the discussion ID and the user ID to the replies table. So that's taking shape. And then with the channels, since we've ran that migration, and I'm sorry if this is confusing, but this is just laying the foundation. So we have our channel created, our table. We need to have association there. So I'm going to create a migration to add the channel ID. To discussions. So channel ID. And it'll be integer. And we'll we'll do one more that's adding the discussion ID to the channel. So Rails generate migration. Plural. So discussion ID is an integer. And we can do Rails db migrate. So what we're doing here is just adding IDs to all the models that are going to correspond to each other. It'll make more sense when I kind of type out the relationship, but they need the ID of the other model to be able to communicate with it. And we're doing a kind of a relationship where all of them can kind of communicate to each other. It's something different we're doing in this app as opposed to the rest we've done so far in the previous videos and series. So let me double check that we're not wrecking anything here. So we got our app running. I can refresh. If we don't get any errors, I think we're good. Cool. Still got the ugly form. We'll take care of that in the next video, more of the view type of work. But this one I just wanted to lay the foundation, get the data side done. So next up we'll be actually talking to our models, and this is going to be pretty important for the sake of this is how they will communicate. So let's start with the discussion and we'll go from there. This one's going to have basically belongs to channel. Everything's going to kind of pass through the discussion. That's kind of how we're going to frame it. It's going to belong to a user. It's going to have many or has many replies, which are dependent destroy. So basically that says if a discussion is deleted, so are the replies on it. And one thing we haven't talked about yet is validation, and you can go pretty heavily into validation on Rails, and this is more or less the server side, so it's not the front end validation, because if you do both, it's definitely wise as opposed to just one or the other. So I definitely recommend both if you can, especially production ready apps. So there's this command called validates, and we're hooking into the title parameter of a discussion as well as the content. And then we're going to say presence true. And that's basically saying you cannot submit a form or a discussion unless there is content within them, both the fields. So it's important to have both to be able to go ahead and post a discussion. So that's essentially it for discussion. Up next, we're going to do the reply. And this is going to belongs to a discussion and belongs to a user. So to put this into more perspective, we've got these belongs to's. I can't talk right, but hey, if we look into our database and our schema at this point, we're on reply. So let's go look at the reply table. This is why I've added discussion ID and a user ID, because it belongs to those. And then if you look at discussion, it's going to belongs to a channel and belongs to a user. So discussion, channel, user. Make sense? Hopefully. Hopefully it's getting a little clearer. So for this one, I'm going to go back for the reply, and we're going to do a validation on the reply, and the same thing, presence is true. You can't post a reply unless there's actual content. And then finally in a channel, this will have has many discussions, has many users, and this is where it gets hairy through discussions. So we're basically creating a join table here, and this is how we're communicating through each. So it basically allows me to go from a user and find a discussion, or from a discussion and find a user, and that's the cool ass thing about it, and why I wanted to kind of look into some sort of model where I needed to do something like this. So oftentimes you're just going to use has many and belongs to, but in some cases where you just want everything available, like categories or channels in this case, that's just kind of what we want to deal with. So discussions is kind of our buffer. Everything kind of flows through it. But then on our user model, you'll see we're going to have a little more on that as well. So let's check that one out. So this is all device stuff. You can leave it there. So this one will have many discussions. And then this is going to be dependent destroy. If user is destroyed, so are there discussions? It's pretty important. And then has many channels through discussions. So this is, relations are hard in the sense of making sense of them. It took me a minute to get my head wrapping around this kind of modeling, but it makes sense in the end because I want everything to kind of have access to everything else. So this is how it ended up in the end. Just checking my spelling. I think we're good. Let me check everything once more. Channel discussions has many users. This should be plural. Pardon me for that. So channel has many users through discussions. Discussion has many, or belongs to channel, belongs to user, has many replies. Dependent destroy, cool. Let's see, a reply belongs to a discussion and a user. And if you think about it, if you say it out loud, you can kind of see that it does do those things. So hopefully it makes a little more sense as you speak it. So we have has many discussions, dependent destroy, channels through discussions. Cool. So I think we're in good shape. So with that done, all of our stuff obviously isn't making sense yet because we don't have the views hooking into those things and querying data. But in the very next video, we'll start to clean up the interface and start to bring this thing to life. And then after that, we'll start getting into user roles and making this thing a little more optimized for actual forum type discussions, posting, and stuff like that. So I'll see you in the very next one.